Hi friends, today we're going to talk about 3 case studies, 2 of them being with US government funding with J1 waivers, and we're going to talk about the processing times for those cases so you can get an update on what's happening now, what's working even with US government funding cases, so you will want to stay tuned. And one thing that we're going to look at is, well, are the processing times longer for these government funding cases or not? Hi, my name is Kosher Grandchild. I'm an immigration attorney, been practicing for over 20 years, so let's jump into these case studies. Before we dive into the case studies, I want to make sure that you understand the basics. You have to have a qualifying relative in order to qualify for a J1 exceptional hardship waiver. So that means, one, either you need to have an exceptional hardship demonstrated to a US citizen spouse or US citizen child or lawful permanent resident child or lawful permanent resident spouse. Now, if you meet that basic requirement, then we look at exceptional hardship factors. There are other types of J1 waivers, but in this video, we're going to talk about the J1 exceptional hardship waiver. If you want to learn about other types of waivers, check them out on my channel. Okay, let's look at the first case study here. In this case, the J1 waiver was approved for a client from Kazakhstan. We filed with USCIS and Department of State on January 21st, 2022. Then Department of State processed the case on March 31st, 2022. Then Department of State processed the I-613 from USCIS on October 4th, 2022. And the Department of State issued a favorable recommendation on December 28th, 2023. And then finally, we got the case approved on January 16th, 2024. So here, even with government funding, you'll see that the case took about 5 days less than 2 years. Here, we based the exceptional hardship off of the US citizen child. Our arguments focused on the potential dangers associated with relocating the American child and the J1 dependent. We also highlighted financial hardships that the J1 would endure in supporting the family. In this case, we did get a request for evidence, but despite the request for evidence, we were able to respond and get the case approved. So you'll see in that case, the 2 main types of hardship were country conditions and then also financial hardship. Now we're going to move on to our second case study. This case also involved US government funding, and the client was from Trinidad and Tobago. So let's jump into the processing times here so you can get an idea of that. We filed with USCIS and Department of State on April 4th, 2022. On April 20th, 2022, Department of State processed the case. Then the Department of State processed the I-613 from USCIS on 11/8, 2022. Basically, when the USCIS issues the I-613, they're indicating that they are willing to approve the case, and they forward it on to the Department of State to make their decision. And then after Department of State makes their decision, USCIS will issue the final approval. Department of State issued their favorable recommendation on January 2nd, 2024, and USCIS approved the case on January 12th, 2024. Here, this was also a case based off of hardship to a US citizen American child and how the child would be impacted if they were forced to leave the United States because the J1 holder had to fulfill the 2-year home residency requirement. Here, the spouse was a J2 dependent, so the entire family would have to be uprooted to go back to their home country. In this case, we left no stone unturned in advocating for our clients' rights and preserving family unity, which is our goal. We were able to get the case approved and secure our client's future in the United States. In this case, 2 forms of exceptional hardship that were addressed were financial hardship and also the country conditions as well. Now you'll notice that this case, even despite the fact that there was government funding, it was approved in less than 2 years. In our next case study, this case did not have government funding, and here the J1 applicant was a business professional from Nigeria. All right, let's look at what the government processing times, and we'll walk you through that step by step. Here, the case was filed with Department of State and USCIS on April 14th, 2022. Department of State processed the case on April 27th, 2023, so they took about 13 days to process it. Then the Department of State processed the I-613 from USCIS on May 15th, 2023, and Department of State issued a favorable recommendation on February 1st, 2024. Finally, the case was approved and USCIS issued a final approval on February 15th, 2024. Here, the case took approximately about 22 months, a little bit less than 2 years. Now, let's look at how did we secure the J-1 waiver approval. Here we argue that departure from the United States would have caused exceptional hardship to the J-1 United States citizen spouse and their American-born child. J-1's spouse here was a full-time worker and relied heavily on J-1's daily care for their child. His absence would have left the family without the support that the U.S. citizen spouse needed. And this is especially true because she had to juggle work commitments and caring for their child. Not only that, but the U.S. citizen also had deep-rooted family ties to the United States, having also served in the Army and then found critical support with the J-1 during challenging times. She also had no connections to J-1's home country and faced significant challenges if forced to relocate there, including losing access to essential benefits like WIC and medical care for herself and their child. In this case, we also argued career hardship because that would be significantly impacted if the U.S. citizen was to go back to the J-1's home country as well. And by making these arguments, we're grateful that we were able to get the case approved here as well. So here you have 3 different cases that we looked at, 2 of them government funding, and you'll see the government funding cases were in line with the processing times with the non-government funding case. Sometimes that's not always the case because sometimes the government funded sponsor can take a long time to respond to the Department of State. But in these cases, you saw that that wasn't the case. I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video. By watching this video, you're bettering yourself. By bettering yourself, you're bettering your family. By bettering your family, you're bettering the world. And if you'd like to continue to get updates, subscribe. Bye.